disastrous.
How do we communicate things in ways that resonate with people is always kind of buzzing around in my head. And Vanilla Ice, with his message, I think he was wise before his time in emergency management, and stop, collaborate, and listen is the precursor to what good emergency management looks like.
I love that we're taking wisdom from Vanilla Ice.
There's wisdom all around us. We just have to be open to receiving it.
This is Elizabeth McNaughton, and welcome to Disrupting Disasters, conversations with disaster experts about how we can do disasters differently. For this episode, I talked to my buddy Dan Neely. He's had many roles over his career and now has been with Wellington Region Emergency Management for 15 years. When I'm travelling, I hear from people, "Do you know Dan Neely?" He has plenty of fans, and for good reason, as he is leading powerful work on how to build resilient communities on the climate frontier. And we're friends and neighbours, which is so fitting because this episode is all about empowering people to work together in their local communities. And I'm so lucky Dan is in mine. Let's get into it. I went for a walk early this morning out in the bay.
It was nice, huh?
It was so beautiful. And then I was like, and then I get to chat to you. What a way to start the day. Couldn't be better.
I'm wearing my Nope socks.
Show me. I can't see them.
That you got me.
Good. Welcome to Disrupting Disasters. I'm so excited. I have been itching to have Dan Neely on the show for a while now, and the moment is finally here. Welcome, Dan Neely from the Wellington Region Emergency Management Office, Manager of Community Resilience and Group Recovery. Welcome.
Morena, it's nice to be here.
Dan is also my neighbour, and we live in Island Bay. And over many years, I've often grabbed a ride with Dan into work, and we've had some really amazing conversations that have helped me solve all sorts of problems. And it's just such a pleasure to have you here so that others can kind of be on some of our conversations. I know your story, but I'm keen for our listeners to know, how did you come to be in emergency management in Aotearoa, in doing what you do?
Okay, well, hey, thanks for inviting me on the show. It is fun to kind of have one of our backyard conversations now in a different format. So my name's Dan. I'm part of the team at the Wellington Region Emergency Management Office, also known as WREMO. As you can tell by my accent, I'm not originally from Aotearoa. I'm originally from Arizona, in the United States. I kind of wanted to get into community development when I was young and joined the Peace Corps. I spent 2 years in Honduras, Central America, after Hurricane Mitch had caused a whole bunch of destruction. And that was kind of my very first exposure to disaster work. So I kind of pursued a community development type of career, found myself working in disaster recovery. Then after that, went back and pursued a master's degree because I realized, I think one of the things in community development is maybe sometimes the structures and the processes aren't as robust as they could be. I pursued an MBA. I thought that would be a good thing to kind of add to my kit, and then ended up working in Sri Lanka after the Boxing Day tsunami. So I spent about 6 months there, again, doing disaster recovery. Emigrated to New Zealand. Throughout that period, worked with a whole bunch of different NGOs on and off, and then somehow kind of got sucked back into emergency management here in New Zealand, civil defense emergency management. And I've been with the Wellington Region Emergency Management Office now for over 15 years. I love my job. And I always introduce myself as a community development person who works in emergency management, because I think that's a really important frame to the perspective that I try to bring to the sector, because I think it's a complement to the operational perspectives that are probably more dominant within the sector. So that's 2 minutes, I guess, about my background.
Wow, 2 years in Peace Corps. How did that shape you? Like, what do you reckon are your big learnings out of that?
Peace Corps is just amazing. I think every Peace Corps volunteer will tell you they walked away receiving more from the communities in the way that they learned about working with communities than they probably offered over that 2 years. And that's no different for me. When you're living with a community and you're embedded in a community and you're making $5 a day, you are integrating as much as is possible to really understand what's going on in that community, those community perspectives and those end user perspectives, right? You and I often talk a lot about design thinking. That is Peace Corps is a really good entrance to understanding kind of your end user. And you don't have any money to do stuff in Peace Corps. You don't get any board budgets. And so you really have to learn community development principles on going where the energy is and meeting people where they're at and recognizing that everybody in that community has something to offer. And it's your responsibility. You're trying to challenge to figure out how do you bring people on as a facilitator, building on what they're already interested in, right? And so those are common things that get talked a lot about in community development. But I think that was something where you really learn how to do that better because you don't have any sort of large funding like you do in maybe other NGOs or experience that I've had with other organizations where you can kind of draw people in. I think that was a really excellent foundation. I'm tremendously grateful for my experiences in Peace Corps. This has really shaped my entire worldview ever since.
I completely agree. There is so much to learn when we're living and working with communities. I've found it also to be personally quite a humbling experience. Have you had that experience where you've actually buggered up? You know, how we sometimes think we know best or we've got the answer. And yeah, have you been humbled in that way? And kind of how did it feel? And tell us about that.
I've got a picture in my office of a dog taking a crap next to a garbage can. And I have that as an ongoing reminder of a piece of work that I did in Peace Corps, where a classic kind of outsider comes in, identifies a problem. And in my instance, I had identified that this community, there was a lot of trash around the community. And I was like, what this community needs is trash cans, right? And if I just get some trash cans going, then I'll be able to, help solve this garbage problem laying around town. And so it was a classic case of outsider comes in, outsider identifies the problem, outsider comes up with the solution, outsider project manages the solution, outsider finds the money for the solution, outsider implements the solution, and not a single person in the community ended up using those garbage cans, right? And it was about 2 or 3 weeks into those garbage cans going up around my village, and I saw this dog taking a crap next to it, and all of them were empty, and I just realized what a good metaphor it was for failure, because it had dawned on me that I did, that was all I to the community, as opposed to, in hindsight, even asking the question, is this a problem that needs to be solved from your perspective, right? And that was a huge learning shift in the way that I began practicing my role as a facilitator in communities, listening, understanding their perspectives first and foremost, before even trying to let my brain go to solution mode. I keep that framed picture in my office as a reminder, and I've talked about that a couple times with my team. Like, we don't ever want to build trash cans. If you find yourself building a trash can, you're on a hide into nothing.
I love that story.
Oh, got one. What's yours? I'm sure. I mean, that's the one I kind of hold on to. What's yours?
I've never told this before, actually. Working in the Maldives on a huge Red Cross reconstruction and relocation project. We'd call it managed retreat these days. And I still, to this day, feel that was one of the hardest things I've ever been involved in. When people are moving from their land, their connections with that land, when they're displaced, and trying to do that well, it's the hardest thing in the world to facilitate or to support or to enable. I had a team of maybe 15 local Maldivians who are amazing, and we were talking to the displaced community and trying to understand what the housing needs were and who would be allocated housing. So, yeah, not easy. And we had to go to another island to interview a whole lot of families there. The weather was marginal. And I said to the captain, should we travel today? And he said, I don't know, it's up to you. And I said to my staff, should we travel today? And they said, oh, we're not sure, it's up to you. So, oh my goodness, I looked at the weather, I kind of looked at the captain, I looked at the team, and I thought, I don't know. And so I said, all right, we'll go. And so we set out on the boat, and the conditions were terrible. The waves were really high. We kept getting slammed against the deck, and I'm looking at all these pale faces, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we shouldn't have sailed today. And then I had to think, why did I go forward with it? Why did I say, yes, let's go? And I realized I was so caught up in the timelines, the goals. We needed to get this list together. We needed to get this project sorted. I put that first. I put achieving the end outcome. I put being on schedule. I put all of that energy and that thought ahead of actually what is comfortable and safe for us to do today, what is best for the team on this boat right now. I just felt miserable about it. And people are starting to throw up, and I was like, oh my goodness. And, I had moments thinking, is this even safe? And the good news was it was safe enough to travel. It was just miserable and uncomfortable. And I should have listened more carefully and understood the nuance of what I was being told by my team more, rather than getting up in my own, we've got to get this done, we must achieve, we can't lose time, that was all me. And so I guess my learning out of that was to put the me aside and really listen and understand the nuance. And I've kept that in mind always, like, is it safe to sail today? Is it right to sail today? Should we be sailing today? What am I hearing? Have become real anchoring questions in my practice going forward. And also, how much of me is in this decision? And is this decision about me or not? And so, buggering up in that way really shaped my practice today.
Yeah, those ongoing metaphors are so important.
Yes, yeah. And you only want to learn those things once.
That's right. To talk about and acknowledge our stumbles along the way, because that's where we learn. When you get into leadership positions, I think it's really important that we acknowledge those stumbles to make it safe for other people to make those stumbles.
Yeah. You also want to share that with others. So I don't know how much you can share and guide others and how much you kind of have to learn yourself. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. There's a happy middle ground as you get up into leadership, that you provide a little bit of direction and share some experiences, but people have to make their own stumbles so it resonates in a way that resonates with them, right?
Yeah. If we keep going with the boat metaphor, and I'm thinking about my career, early on in those disasters, like those big ones, you're pretty much sort of left to sink or swim in these big situations, figure it out, do the best you can. We didn't have a lot of guidance, or I don't think there was a whole lot of thought given to how well supported we were, or you just had to suck it up and be resilient and off you go. And I don't know, was that your experience early on?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen that approach break a lot of people in the sector. I think the emergency management sector is definitely getting better about that. I know when I first joined, it was very much like that is just the accepted norm. Thank goodness we've had a new generation of emergency managers coming through, really challenging that. Sometimes it takes those new perspectives. I think we've started seeing those changes occur just in the last 10 years, where that's just not on anymore. And people should not have to go through an emergency event in the emergency management space as practitioners and come out broke on the other side. And that's something that's been a real big 180 for me. Is our job is to look after our people first and foremost, and build systems well before the event to ensure that we are looking after our people day to day. And then when they come out the other side, they're not going like, I'm done with this sector, this is nonsense, and come out broken. That's just heartbreaking. It's certainly a big takeaway for me as far as how I view my own role, but most importantly, I think just for the organization, when we go into those events, we've got to look after our people first and foremost.
It is heartbreaking and it's unnecessary. And I think too, we're now on the climate frontier. And so we need to grow people, support people into a career of decades doing this work, and this is where the real value is. And it's just, we lose so much when people leave the sector. We've got so much churn and burn. Yeah, I love what you're saying. This is our people first as we go into a big disaster is key. It's really, really cool. And I love your stories. I love how you communicate, and you're going to hate me saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. But what happened is when I travel, for example, when I'm in Australia, I think of, this one time a guy gave me a lift home from a workshop, and the guy goes to me, "Do you know Dan Neely?" And I'm like, yeah, he's my neighbor. I know Dan well. And he's like, "Stop, collaborate, and listen." And I was just like, oh, no way, right? So you've got this album, I'd call it, of greatest hits, Dan, and how you communicate some of the key messages in interesting ways. So, tell us about Stop, Collaborate, and Listen.
That is weird to hear. And you
have a fan club, dude. I'm telling you. You never believe me, but it's there.
I think you're referencing a presentation I gave, I guess, a while back now around the importance of reframing command and control, which I'm not a big fan of the word control within our sector. I think it sends the wrong message in a whole bunch of different ways. I think it's just, how do we communicate things in ways that resonate with people is always kind of buzzing around in my head. And Vanilla Ice, with his message, I think he was wise before his time in emergency management, and Stop, Collaborate, and Listen is the precursor to what good emergency management looks like. And I think I gave a presentation on that, and I'm glad to hear it resonated with some people a few years on.
I love that we're taking wisdom from Vanilla Ice.
Yeah, right? There's wisdom all around us. We just have to be open to receiving it.
I actually, though, if people followed that wisdom and did stop, collaborate, and listen, we'd have a totally different system and a totally different world.
We jump to solutions very quickly. And again, we know that maybe, I think you had flipped the whole stop, collaborate, listen, but maybe stop, listen, collaborate. I think that's a community development mindset as opposed to other mindsets in our sector. From my experience, I think that whole approach pays dividends in the long run.
And so what's the wisdom and the key message from the Big Lebowski presentation? Another one that I hear about regularly.
There's a lot of wisdom that we can gain from the Big Lebowski. But I don't know if I feel like that's an entirely different podcast.
We can totally do another episode on that.
Yeah. How the main character, the dude, navigates his world is a good model. On a superficial level, he might look like a burned out stoner loser, but below that, I think he's quite a deliberate, methodical person who asks questions first, generally seeks to understand the world and accept the world without pushing back too hard, and kind of works with the energy he's given. Very superficial. That's a very superficial description of how I think the dude can help emergency management practitioners.
Thank you. I love the idea, and I feel like you're right. It's a whole episode in itself, which I would love to do with you. Our world is changing fast, and I'm interested to hear about your approach and your thinking around community resilience, and maybe some of the kind of misconceptions that you might be facing.
I think in our sector, and broad generalizations, I'd say we don't fully appreciate community resilience and maybe probably more macro level community development as a profession. It's often referred to as kind of like fluffy stuff, whereas good community development is actually based on really well-established theory and practices that draw on a whole range of professions like public health promotion and psychology and design thinking and facilitation and just community development, strengths-based learning. And when that is done well, you see very deliberate methodologies applied. But because that's not commonly understood in our sector, I think on the surface, it can be viewed as just fluffy stuff, going out there and do community work. And that I think is a misconception. And I think an area that is really changing. We just saw some of the recommendations come out by government yesterday. And the very first one was that emergency management needs to integrate the role of community into all of its planning, and not just from a public education, go tell people what they needed to get prepared, but seeing community as part of the solution, a whole of society approach where a lot of that capacity that we need to solve these problems is all around us, right? And that, when you take a strengths-based community development lens on the challenges that we're facing, the official system just does not have the solutions by far and away, does not have the solutions. We need to take a whole society approach to that. And the way that we engage with our communities, the how, is a growth area for our sector to achieve the kind of what's that we want to do. But we often skip the how and jump to the what's. And sometimes we just kind of land on public education as a what, as opposed to a wider integration of capacity and capability into the emergency management system. We're seeing that change. I think we're getting signals from central government down. We're seeing a range of CDM groups really starting to employ this more deliberately, and it's pretty exciting.
I hear what you're saying about this perception of fluffy or soft, and it totally gets up my goat, because I've just experienced so many times when you don't do this work well, when you don't do the so-called soft skills well, everything gets real hard fast. For example, I've seen infrastructure projects sabotaged by communities in recovery, or I've seen the entire community revolt against one of these solutions to the point where the president of the country is now involved. This is the kind of hard that you create when you don't have these kind of skills or approaches in place. And I don't think it's well understood just how you can actually save time, energy, money, and do better with communities through the types of skills and approaches that you're talking about. And I'm really keen on your reflections of how this plays out in recent events like the Maui fires, or what we're seeing unfolding right now with disasters.
Yeah, I think one of the things we see in particularly big events, we do our best, and there's amazing people in this sector, but there's never enough capacity in the official system to meet the demands of a large scale event. And communities, time and time and time again, 1 minute, before the event, they're looking at getting their kids to soccer practice, whatever they're doing. And then an event happens and they reprioritize their energy and their efforts to solving the immediate life safety problems for themselves, for their family, for their neighbors. And the ethos that we really try to carry forward here is everyone in society is an emergency manager, right? We evolved as Homo sapiens over many, 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 many thousands of years to solve emergency problems right in front of us. And so having that capability and viewing that capability all around us reframes how we can solve those problems. And so when we look at some big events, people turn that energy to those problems. And you just referenced the Maui fires. I've been talking about that for the last year because that really resonates and hit home with me as an American, that the FEMA response really didn't stand up, as I understand it, till like day 5, right? And that was a suburb level event. It was an island. It was hard to get assets there. And yet that evening, people were emptying out Costco and grocery stores and surging that support to their friends and family and their neighbors. And the only real response was the community response for 5 days. And, America's got a lot going on, but we've got a lot of stuff in the United States and a lot of resources. And if America can't get those kind of resources to a suburb level event in a state for day 5, that is an indication not of capability so much to me, but of capacity. And when those needs are being met by the community, and in many respects effectively met by the community, we need to be looking at that going, how do we integrate that capacity and capability pre-event? Because that is what people are going to do, right? It's not what we want them to do. It is what they are going to do. And so how do we build our systems to integrate that capacity and capability to get the best outcome?
Absolutely. This has never been more important, this reframing. We're in this transitionary time. We know that what we have and what we've done in the past isn't fit for purpose. And we've got this intensity and frequency of disasters coming at us that we've never had before. I'm interested in your thoughts on how we disrupt. I just absolutely love your saying, provoke with love. I've totally adopted that one. What are your thoughts on this moment we find ourselves in?
Yeah, we're seeing the second hurricane in 2 weeks roll through Florida right now, a big, massive hurricane. So things are getting weird, right, in front of our eyes. I'm always come back to the community development perspective. I actually think it's really exciting time to be in this sector. I'm actually really hopeful for the future because I see a generation of emergency managers coming through that are challenging some of those norms. Like the government report that just came out yesterday sent a really strong signal because it was the very first recommendation is like the emergency management sector needs to integrate community into the way it practices in readiness and response recovery. I feel pretty hopeful, and I think New Zealand is actually really well positioned to lead a lot of that because the fact that we don't have resources in the same way that maybe the United States does, physical resources, but we have high levels of social capital in this country and a real can-do attitude, number 8 wire, figure out, make it work, speaks to the improvisational nature of what is required in emergency management and working together to solve problems, right? So what we're trying to do is build those systems. Our community emergency hub model is one aspect of how we're trying to do that.
And the hub model, just for our listeners who might not be familiar with it?
Basically, a design thinking process. We really looked at what do communities do in an event and how can we build our system to reflect that? And so just like the Wi-Fi and pretty much every other big event, there's always a community response. One of the challenges of a community response is they're not organized. That can sometimes be viewed as a bad thing, but I just see it as what it is. How do we build our systems to adapt to that? In every suburb, we've established a common location that is known to the community called a community emergency hub. And it is basically the place where we are encouraging our communities to go after a large event to problem solve and match needs and offers. So people either generally have some sort of need or they are fine and they want to offer assistance. And you have kind of an inefficient market of people trying to run around matching those needs and offers. And what we saw, like out of the Hawaii example, I think it was like day 3, where people started to coalesce around the shopping center and they matched up, they established their own community logistics, right? Where people were just driving through, getting the resources they need. We're trying to bring that forward to day 1 by in every suburb within 30 minutes, people have an identified place where they can go. Hub feels more informal than center, which is the end user feedback we got when we developed the concept. It's not a highly structured thing. The most important thing is people are able to come together, match needs and offers, give them a little bit of structure. We do a bunch of fun planning. That's always more of a block party than it is this kind of hyper planned thing where neighbors are meeting neighbors and they get an idea and they walk out understanding that they can do this. And that has become the center of our program. And we've seen it deployed effectively now a few times around New Zealand. And we're pretty excited because we're starting to see it getting adopted around the world in Australia and UK and Canada and the States. Different places have all been reaching out and kind of starting to take the model and adopt it into their own environment. So the benefit of that is it's not a trained volunteer, CDM volunteer program. The hub is actually not even an emergency management asset. The community is going to do what they're going to do. And we are building our systems to work with whatever energy that they kind of end up generating. That way we have a line of sight to every suburb to go, what is it that you need as a community and how can we better support you? So it's definitely a shift in the way that we're working and trying to engage with our communities and empower them to do whatever they're going to do in a way that's better, faster, and safer.
I love it. And there's definitely an energy building around this concept, which is really encouraging to see. And I love that you've come to this through design thinking. It's a passion of ours at Disastrous to bring design thinking, ways of being innovative, mindsets, the skills that are needed. We're really gearing up to provide support around that. Can you talk a little bit about the mindset and some of the skills that led to the development of the hub model?
Yeah, so there's out of the Christchurch earthquake, I think that was a real catalyst for us to ask ourselves, how do we do this better, right? And not create what we as emergency managers think is the solution. Again, garbage cans, right? This community needs that, and that will solve the problem. It's understanding what communities do time and time again, and then looking inwards going, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? And that provided clarity. It took us a while to get there, to be honest, like any good design thinking process, right? Nailing the question that you're asking, it takes longer than generally building the solution. we realized that it was really that essence of giving people a common meeting location to problem solve based on, that idea that everybody in society is an emergency manager. If we accept that as a premise, most people are going to do the right thing. Most people are going to look after people because that's how, again, we evolved as society. And that's a strengths-based approach. It's a positive view of our community. They are part of the solution, not part of the problem. When we kind of landed that, we developed a kind of a 3-step process where we kind of bring people together. Again, it's more of a block party approach. And we run through a why, what, how process of why do you love the community that you live in? When we first started running, people would be like, I didn't come here for that. I came here to talk about community response. And you're like, bear with us. Why do you love this suburb? And then have them put 2 post-it notes up. We create a word cloud and they'd see their community reflected right then there, right? And I had literally seen people like tear up because like, oh, we're responding to protect the things and the people that we love. Like that's that anchoring of the why. And then we run through a strength-based, asset-based community development process, which is what are all the assets you have around you? And you get people go through a mapping exercise. Again, they'd be like, we don't have anything. And then you get a kind of wisdom of the crowds approach, get 20 people around the room to talk about the assets they have in their community under kind of a framework. And a million different ideas come out. What are some of the challenges? That gets mapped. And then the last step is, how would you solve these 5 common challenges that we've identified that are common across every disaster? How would you solve those without any support from the official response? And we're really clear, like, you get nothing from us for a week. You get no fire, no police, no emergency management, no council, no health. And we ask them to problem solve under the 5 themes of rescue and looking after people, health, provision, water, shelter, and food. And they come up with a whole bunch of ideas, and that becomes the basis for improvisation in a response, which is not much different than what we do in the official response, right? So it's not a community plan. It is a framework and an ideas bank for coordinating their own response using the assets that are all around them. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
So many things. I think one of the things that has struck me is just how many questions you're asking. And that's something that, I've seen over the years, that actually to lead well in this space is about mastering the art of asking good questions at the right time, in the right way, to the right people. The other thing that struck me is just the beautiful honesty, Dan. No one's coming for 5 days.
7 days.
7 days, right? I was thinking working week, but okay, 7 days, even more honest, right? And getting people into that mindset and managing what is, their expectations, I think is really empowering and really gives agency and is really honest. I think the more we can be honest as a sector and in our messaging, the better. And a kind of right sizing of our roles. We don't have this control and this influence and these kind of endless assets to deploy and bring in and save the day. Actually, we don't. And so to be not only honest with communities, but honest with ourselves.
Yeah, and it's actually a really important part of that process for us to get up in front of people and tell them, like, there isn't the support you think is coming. I think that's, in a way, we've done probably 30 or 40 years of disservice to our communities by over-pitching what emergency management can do. And part of what we are trying to do is really start to reset those expectations with the public, because there just is not the capacity in the system. And I come back to, with all the physical resources that the United States has, if they can't get to a suburb level event in their own country for 5 days, in New Zealand, for an event like AF8 or Hikarangi fault earthquake, for this long, skinny country at the bottom of the world, we aren't going to be able to stand up an official response for a while, right? And so our communities will play a critical role in that, and we have to help them understand their role. So I think that's foundation. And you see people kind of go through, when we get up and talk about that, you often see people kind of go through the 5 stages of grief real fast. They're like, what? No, but you guys are emergency management. But within about 2 minutes, you see them move into acceptance and go into problem solving mode. And that is one of the coolest things to participate and see. People go like, okay, I get it. And they immediately go, what do we got to do? I think some of the best feedback I've gotten from our communities is like, why do we even have you guys anyway? We got this. Colleague Jess Hare, shout out to Jess Hare, she came up with this great phrase that I've been ripping off. The public thinks they have comprehensive insurance, but what they really have is kind of third-party insurance. We don't want people to get caught out after an accident realizing they don't have the policy that they think they do. And so we're trying to help people understand what the capacity is. This is a capacity issue, not a capability issue. I think our sector, we've got fantastic people in New Zealand, around the world, working in this space, but there just isn't the capacity to meet the needs in a large-scale response.
Yeah. And there's also, to run with that, there's a real reluctancy to pay the premium. Whatever insurance we've got, we don't want to invest and pay the premium. That's the other point that needs addressing. You get the coverage you pay for as well.
And as things get weirder, those costs are just going to go up, right? So it becomes a conversation of where do we want to invest and what kind of insurance do we want? Because the demands are going up, not just in house insurance, but across everything, right?
Which is why we come back to design thinking, asking the right questions, and deeply investigating how we go forward. We've spoken a lot about how to do things differently. If you could leave us as leaders or personally with one thing to do differently, what would it be?
We see this a lot in emergency management. We want resilient community, but then from systems change point of view, you don't see a lot of the how in the practice. So when we talk about capability development, for example, it's commonly understood capability development is how to do SIMs better, right? Or coordinators, at ICS, whatever your listeners are familiar with. If the resilient communities is our outcome, then what is emergency management doing in the how space to enable that to happen? And I think that is the role, again, of embedding community development theory and practice into the how we do our work. When those perspectives come to the forefront, it changes how you view the challenge in front of you, right? And going in from a strengths-based community development lens as a foundation, I think would be the number one thing I'd like to see evolve in a positive way throughout all aspects of the sector.
Beautiful. Change requires courage. It requires courage to go against the status quo. And I've often felt like I've been kind of in my courage corner, trying to find everything that I've got to push a new idea, push a new way of thinking, push change forward in some way. How have you found that over your career to step out and do things differently? And what would you say to others to help them find theirs?
I think you referenced the line that we have talked about a few times around provoking with love. I think that is an important role that we all have to bring about positive change is you've got to poke the bear a little bit, but not in a negative way. You got to do it with love in your heart, knowing that everybody's trying to do their best. But if you don't prod and poke a little bit, then you're just never going to bring about change, right? So it's important to look at what does good look like and challenge existing thinking. And I think doing that with humor and love in your heart, knowing that everybody wants a good outcome, is a good way to bring people on that journey. And yeah, I guess that'd be my response to that question.
My response to that is, can we get T-shirts made? I want to make that T-shirt, Provoke with love. I love that. I look forward to this world emerging, Dan.
It is emerging, and it's actually, my team was just telling me yesterday, they're organizing a community preparedness event around something that's like equivalent to a bingo night in one of their communities because it's already popular and it's already working there. And when I hear stuff like that, I'm just given so much inspiration.
And I think hope and optimism are so needed and so important now. And I want to thank you for sharing that. You inspire me. You give me hope, Dan. And I've gained so much from our conversations and your insights over the years. We're so grateful and so lucky to have you here doing this awesome mahi. Thank you so much, Dan. And I can't wait to see how more of your work unfolds in Aotearoa and the world. Kia ora.
And thank you. You contribute a tremendous amount and always have. I just really value these conversations as well, and just really want to recognize everybody in our sector that does this great work. Our team at WREMO, there's so many passionate people that want to make a difference. And I hope our communities understand the real dedication that this sector has to supporting them. It's really inspirational to have some of the conversations that we have around here sometimes. Kia ora.
Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening. A little reminder, if you enjoyed this podcast, please help us out and subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite platform. Even better, share it with someone in your network who might find it interesting. This podcast is produced by Disastrous. You can find out more at disastrous.co and join our newsletter for resources and content from this episode. Join us next time for another Disrupting Disasters.